Hi, I'm Mark. I'm 29 years old and I work as a software developer. My life is pretty normal, but my family, well, they're a whole other story. I'm the middle child, which, if you've ever been one, you know can be complicated. Let me explain. My older sister, Emily, is 34. She's what people call the golden child. She's the kind of person who always seems to have it all together. Emily's charming, confident, and most importantly, she's the apple of my parents' eye. Growing up, she always managed to steal the spotlight, whether it was excelling in school, being the star of every family gathering, or just having this natural ability to make people adore her. Then there's my younger brother, Jake, who's 25. Jake is the complete opposite of Emily. He's super chill, the kind of guy who goes with the flow and avoids any kind of drama. Honestly, he's mastered the art of staying out of trouble and out of the spotlight. While Emily and I were busy trying to figure out where we fit in the family dynamic, Jake was off doing his own thing, completely unbothered. And then there's me, right in the middle. I've always felt like the odd one out. I'm not as outgoing as Emily, and I don't have Jake's laid-back attitude. I guess you could say I'm somewhere in between, quiet, calm, and maybe a little too sensitive for my own good. I've always tried to keep the peace, even if it meant swallowing my feelings or letting things slide. That's just who I am. But sometimes, being the peacekeeper feels like being invisible. Take family discussions, for example. Whenever we're all together, I'm usually the one sitting quietly, watching as everyone else dominates the conversation. If there's an argument, I'm the guy trying to smooth things over, even if it's at my own expense. My parents love Emily's confidence and adore Jake's carefree attitude, but me? I'm the reliable one. The one who's always there but never really noticed. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my family. But growing up with Emily and Jake has definitely shaped how I see myself. It's like I've always been in their shadows, trying to find my own place in a family where the roles were already taken. Emily's the star, Jake's the easygoing one, and me, I guess I'm just there. One thing we've always had as a family is our Sunday dinners. Every week, we all gather at my parents' house to catch up. It's a tradition we've had for as long as I can remember. My mom cooks a big meal, my dad makes his signature jokes, the kind that make you groan and laugh at the same time, and we all sit around the table, pretending everything's perfect. Sunday dinners are a mix of comfort and chaos. They're predictable in the sense that you know what's coming. Emily will share her latest achievements, Jake will crack a few jokes to keep things light, and my parents will ask me how work is going, briefly, before moving on to something more interesting. But despite the predictability, there's always this underlying tension. You see, Emily has this knack for making little digs at me, usually disguised as jokes. She'll say things like, "Oh, Mark, remember when you tried to play basketball? That was adorable." Everyone laughs, and I do too, but it stings. It always stings. Over the years, I've learned to brush it off. That's just Emily being Emily, right? She doesn't mean any harm, or at least that's what I tell myself. I've gotten so used to being overlooked or teased that it's almost become normal. Jake, on the other hand, stays out of it. He's like Switzerland, neutral and completely uninterested in the drama. If things get awkward, he'll crack a joke or change the subject. I admire him for that, but sometimes I wish he'd have my back, just once. So that's my family in a nutshell. Emily, the golden child who can do no wrong. Jake, the laid-back youngest who steers clear of conflict. And me, the middle child who's always trying to keep the peace, even if it means fading into the background. I've always accepted this dynamic as just the way things are. It's not perfect, but it's my family, and I've learned to live with it. But recently, things have started to shift. Emily's been acting different. She's colder toward me, more passive-aggressive than usual. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it's hard to ignore. She gives me these looks during dinner, like she's daring me to say something. And then there are the comments. Subtle, cryptic little things that make my stomach twist. Like the other night, she said, "Some people just can't help but put on a show, can they?" When I asked her what she meant, she just smiled and said, "Oh, nothing. Don't mind me." I've tried to shrug it off to tell myself it's just Emily being Emily. But something feels different this time. It's like she's got this grudge against me, and I don't even know why. I haven't told anyone about it. Not Jake, not my parents. I mean, what would I even say? Hey, I think Emily's mad at me for something? It sounds ridiculous. So I've been keeping it to myself, hoping it'll blow over. But deep down, I have this nagging feeling that it won't. That this time, whatever's going on with Emily is bigger than a few passive-aggressive comments. And, honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to find out what it is. For now, I'll just keep showing up to Sunday dinners, playing my role as the quiet, reliable middle child. But something tells me that this calm, predictable routine is about to change, and not in a good way. Growing up, it was impossible not to notice how different Emily and I were. She was always the star, the one who could walk into any room and instantly command attention. Whether it was her straighter report cards, her spot on the debate team, or the way she could charm adults with her quick wit and confidence, Emily was the definition of a golden child. My parents would beam with pride whenever they talked about her. And then there was me. I wasn't bad at school, but I wasn't great either. I wasn't particularly outgoing, and I definitely wasn't charming. I was just me, quieter, more introverted, and according to everyone in my family, the sensitive one. It wasn't meant as a compliment. I can still remember family gatherings where Emily would be the center of attention, telling some hilarious story about her latest achievements. People would laugh, applaud, and hang on to her every word. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting in the corner, trying not to get in the way. If I said something, it felt like nobody really heard me. It wasn't that they were trying to ignore me, but when you have someone like Emily in the room, it's hard to compete. As we got older, this dynamic didn't change much. If anything, it got worse. Emily developed this habit of making little digs at me, always framed as jokes. She'd say things like, "Mark, do you still get nervous ordering at restaurants?" Or, wow, you're actually dressed nicely today. It was the kind of stuff that would make everyone laugh but leave me feeling small. The thing is, I don't think Emily even realized how much her words hurt. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. Either way, I got used to brushing it off. That's just Emily, I'd tell myself. She doesn't mean any harm. But lately, something has been different. Over the past few weeks, Emily has been acting strange. It's hard to explain, but there's this tension whenever we're in the same room. At our usual Sunday dinners, she's colder toward me than usual. I'll catch her giving me these icy stares, like she's angry at me for something. And then there are the comments. They're not her typical jabs, they're sharper, more cryptic. Like the other night when she said, "Some people really know how to play innocent, don't they?" She didn't name anyone, but the way she was looking at me made it pretty obvious who she was talking about. I remember laughing awkwardly and saying, "What's that supposed to mean?" She just smirked and said, "Oh, nothing. Forget I said anything. It's been eating at me ever since." What does she mean by that? What does she think I've done? At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Emily's always had a dramatic streak, and this is probably just her way of stirring the pot. But the more I think about it, the harder it is to shake the feeling that something's really wrong. The weirdest part is that I haven't done anything to upset her, or at least not that I know of. I mean, we're not super close, but we've never had any major fights. So why is she acting like this? I thought about bringing it up to Jake, but I already know what he'd say. He'd shrug and tell me not to worry about it. Jake doesn't do drama. He's the kind of person who would rather ignore a problem than deal with it. I envy that about him sometimes. And as for my parents, I don't even know where to start. They adore Emily. Always have, always will. If I tried to tell them that she's been acting weird, they'd probably just brush it off. "Oh, Mark, you're overthinking things again," my mom would say. You know how Emily is. She doesn't mean anything by it. So I've decided to keep it to myself for now. Maybe this is just a phase, and it'll pass on its own. Maybe Emily is stressed about something and taking it out on me without realizing it. Whatever it is, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. But there's a part of me that can't let it go. Every time I see her, I can feel the tension building. It's like she's waiting for something for me to crack, or for some moment to pounce. I keep replaying her words in my head. Some people really know how to play innocent. What does that mean? Why would she say that? I've always prided myself on being the calm one, the peacekeeper. But lately it feels like my patience is being tested in ways I've never experienced before. I don't know what's coming, but I have this sinking feeling that whatever it is, it's not going to be good. For now, I'll keep going to Sunday dinners, pretending everything's fine. But deep down, I know things aren't fine. Something is brewing, and it's only a matter of time before it all comes to the surface. And when it does, I'm not sure if I'll be ready for it. Over the past few weeks, something has felt off. It started subtly at first. My parents, who usually called me a few times a week to chat, became distant. Our conversations felt shorter, more formal. My mom, who would normally ask me endless questions about work or my life in general, suddenly seemed disinterested. My dad, always the jokester, stopped cracking his usual dad jokes when I called. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they were tired. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then came the Sunday dinners. Our weekly family dinners, which were usually predictable, sometimes frustrating but familiar, felt heavier, tense. The warmth that made those gatherings bearable seemed to evaporate. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a weird energy in the room. Emily was her usual self, or so I thought, chatting away and dominating the conversation. But my parents weren't as engaged as they normally would be. Jake, too, seemed different. He avoided eye contact with me, which was unusual for him. He's usually the chill one, the buffer that keeps everything light. But even he seemed uncomfortable, like he was trying to stay invisible. I tried to convince myself it was just a weird week. Maybe everyone was in a bad mood. But as the weeks went on, it became clear this wasn't a coincidence. Something was definitely wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. It started out like any other Sunday dinner. My mom made her famous lasagna. My dad poured everyone a glass of wine, and we all sat around the table pretending to care about each other's updates. Emily, of course, was in her element. She talked about her latest work project, dropping just enough buzzwords to make sure everyone knew how important and successful she was. I was halfway through my plate of lasagna when Emily dropped the bomb. "You know," she said casually, twirling her fork in her hand, "it's funny how some people can pretend to be so trustworthy when they're really not." The room went silent. My dad set his glass down. My mom froze mid-bite. Even Jake, who had been scrolling on his phone under the table, looked up. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emily smirked, the kind of smirk that makes your stomach turn. "Oh, I don't know," she said, her tone dripping with fake innocence. "Why don't you tell us, Mark? You know exactly what I'm talking about." I blinked, completely caught off guard. "No, I don't. What are you even talking about?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "It's just sad, really. You've always been good at playing the victim, haven't you?" I looked around the table, expecting someone to jump in, to ask Emily what she was talking about, or at least tell her to stop being so cryptic. But no one said a word. My mom stared down at her plate. My dad wouldn't look at me. Jake just shook his head like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Emily," I said, my voice a little sharper this time. "If you have something to say, just say it. What's your problem?" She shrugged. "Forget it. I don't want to cause a scene." That was it. She refused to elaborate, and the conversation awkwardly shifted to something else. But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner was unbearable. I barely ate, and as soon as we finished, I excused myself and went home. The whole drive back, I couldn't stop replaying what she'd said. What did she mean by pretending to be trustworthy? Why did she look at me like that? And why was everyone else acting so weird? I decided I needed answers, so the next day I called Jake. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. Hey Jake, I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Can I ask you something? Sure, he said, though he sounded hesitant. What's going on with Emily? She's been acting strange toward me, and I feel like mom and dad are too. Do you know something I don't? There was a long pause. I could hear him sigh on the other end. Look, man, he finally said. I didn't want to get involved, but yeah, I think I know what's going on. My stomach dropped. What is it? It's Emily, he said. She's been telling mom and dad stuff about you. Stuff? What kind of stuff? I asked, my voice rising. Jake hesitated again, and I could tell he didn't want to say it. She told them you're in trouble at work, that you've been embezzling money or something. I froze. What? I know it sounds crazy, Jake said quickly. I didn't believe it, but Emily's been going on about it for weeks. She told mom and dad she found out about it and that you're hiding it. I don't know where she's getting this from, but they believe her. They what? I said, my voice cracking. Emily's always been good at convincing them, Jake said quietly. You know how it is. She's Emily. They don't question her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister had told my parents I was stealing money from my job. Why would she do that? And how could they believe her without even asking me? Jake, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. You know that's not true, right? Of course I do, he said. But you know how mom and dad are. They always take her side. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My own family, my parents, thought I was some kind of criminal, all because of a lie Emily made up. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I didn't know why Emily was doing this, but one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't sleep the night Jake told me what Emily had done. My mind kept replaying his words, they believe her. How could they believe something so ridiculous without even asking me? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. By the time morning came, I knew I had to talk to my parents. I needed to clear this up, fast. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, my heart pounding the entire way. I had no idea how the conversation would go, but I couldn't stand the thought of them thinking I was some kind of criminal. When I walked in, my mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. My dad was sitting in his recliner, reading the newspaper. They looked up when they saw me, but there was a stiffness in their expressions, like they weren't sure how to greet me. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, can we talk? My mom hesitated, then nodded. Of course. What's on your mind? I sat down at the kitchen table, and they joined me. For a moment, none of us said anything. I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, I know you've heard some things about me. Things Emily's been saying. My mom and dad exchanged a glance. It was a quick look, but it spoke volumes. They already knew what I was talking about. Mark, my dad started, we don't want to assume anything, but you have, I interrupted. Haven't you? You've assumed I've done something wrong because Emily told you I did. My mom sighed and placed her hands on the table. It's not that simple, she said. Emily seemed really upset when she told us. She said she found out something concerning. We didn't want to believe it, but what? I asked, my voice rising. You didn't even ask me about it. You just took her word for it? My mom looked down, avoiding my gaze. We just don't know who to believe anymore, she said quietly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents, the people who had raised me, didn't trust me enough to even hear my side of the story. I can't believe this, I said, shaking my head. Emily has no proof because it's not true. She made it up. And instead of asking me, you just believed her? Mark, my dad said, trying to sound reasonable, we're not saying we think you did it. We're just trying to understand what's going on. Then why do I feel like you've already made up your minds? I snapped. They didn't have an answer for that, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear one. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. If you want to believe Emily's lies, fine, but don't expect me to just sit back and take it. With that, I left, slamming the door behind me. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to Emily's place. I couldn't let this go any longer. She needed to know that I wasn't going to let her get away with this. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me, but not in a good way. Mark, she said, crossing her arms. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, pushing past her into the living room. By all means, make yourself at home, she said sarcastically, shutting the door behind me. I turned to face her. Why are you doing this, Emily? Why are you spreading lies about me to mom and dad? She raised an eyebrow. Lies. Is that what you're calling it? Yes, I said firmly. Because that's what it is. You know I didn't do anything wrong, so why are you trying to ruin my relationship with our parents? Emily smirked, and for a moment I saw something cold in her eyes. Oh, so you're mad because they finally see through your perfect little act. What are you talking about? I asked, genuinely confused. Don't play dumb, she said. You've always acted like the innocent one, the reliable one. But we both know that's not who you really are. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Emily, that doesn't even make sense. I've done nothing to you. So why are you doing this to me? She didn't answer. Instead, she just gave me a smug look and said, you should go. I've got things to do. After that conversation, I didn't know what to think. Was Emily just trying to mess with me for fun? Did she actually believe her own lies? None of it made sense. But what happened next made things even worse. The rumors didn't stop with my parents. Emily started dropping hints to other relatives. At family gatherings, I noticed people giving me strange looks, whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. One aunt, who usually greeted me with a hug, barely said hello. Another uncle made a snide comment about how trust is hard to come by these days. It was clear Emily had been busy. The worst part was that no one confronted me directly. They just judged me from a distance, acting like I was some kind of outcast. It was humiliating. For the first time in my life, I started avoiding family events. I couldn't stand the looks, the whispers, the passive-aggressive comments. It felt like my entire family had turned against me, and I didn't even know why. I felt cornered, alone, and completely powerless. Emily had created this narrative where I was the bad guy, and no matter what I said or did, it felt like no one wanted to hear the truth. But I knew one thing: I couldn't let her win. Whatever her motives were, I wasn't going to let her destroy my reputation and my relationships with the people I cared about. I just didn't know how to fight back yet. I hadn't been looking forward to Sunday dinner. After everything that had happened, I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. But skipping it wasn't an option, not yet. I needed to prove to my parents that Emily was lying. I told myself I'd keep things calm, that I'd take control of the situation without letting Emily drag me into one of her games. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension. My parents greeted me with forced smiles, and Jake gave me a quick nod before going back to scrolling on his phone. Emily, as usual, looked completely at ease, sitting at the table with her glass of wine like she had nothing to hide. Dinner started off quietly. Too quietly. My mom asked Jake about work, and my dad tried to tell a story about something funny that had happened at the hardware store, but nobody was really listening. The atmosphere was heavy, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. We were halfway through the meal when Emily casually set down her fork and sighed. You know, she began, her tone light but her words sharp. I've been thinking about how important honesty is in a family. I froze, my stomach tightening. Here we go, I thought. My mom looked up, confused. What do you mean, Emily? Emily gave me a quick glance before turning her attention back to my mom. Well, she said, I just think it's sad when people aren't honest with their loved ones. It's hard to trust someone who keeps secrets, don't you think? I couldn't stay silent anymore. If you have something to say, Emily, just say it, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. She tilted her head, pretending to be surprised. Oh, Mark, I wasn't talking about you. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. I clenched my fists under the table. I don't have anything to hide, and you know that. Stop playing games. She put on a look of mock concern. Games? I'm just worried about you, Mark. I mean, don't you think it's time you were honest with us? With yourself? My dad cleared his throat. Emily, what's this about? He asked, but his tone wasn't demanding, it was wary, like he already suspected where this was going. Emily sighed dramatically, looking around the table like she was about to deliver some heartbreaking news. I didn't want to bring this up, she said, but I just feel like we can't ignore it anymore. Mark, don't you think you owe it to the family to tell the truth about what's been going on at work? I felt a flash of anger so intense it made my head spin. What are you even talking about? I demanded. You know exactly what I'm talking about, she shot back, her voice sharper now. You've been acting so innocent, but the truth always comes out eventually. That's enough, I said, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. If you're going to accuse me of something, then say it outright. Stop hiding behind these stupid little comments. Emily looked up at me, her expression cool and composed. I don't need to say anything. We all know what you did. I laughed bitterly, unable to believe what I was hearing. What I did? You're making things up, Emily, and you know it. You've been spreading lies about me. And for what? To make yourself feel better? Emily's face twisted into a mask of fake hurt. Lies. Wow, Mark. I can't believe you're trying to gaslight me in front of everyone. This is exactly what I was talking about. You always act like the victim. I looked around the table, desperate for someone to step in, to take my side. But my parents just sat there, silent and unsure. My mom had tears in her eyes, and my dad rubbed his temples like he was trying to make sense of everything. Even Jake wouldn't meet my eyes. Do you seriously believe her? I asked, my voice cracking. Do you really think I'd do something like that? My mom hesitated before saying, Mark, we don't know who to believe. Emily says she has reasons to think. She doesn't have reasons. I yelled. She doesn't have proof because it's not true. Emily crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair, looking victorious. If it's not true, she said calmly, then prove it. Show us you're innocent. I stared at her, my chest heaving. How am I supposed to prove I didn't do something that never happened? That's not my problem, she said with a shrug. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't believe this was happening. My own family, my parents were siding with Emily over me, all because she decided to spin some ridiculous story. You know what? I said, grabbing my jacket. I'm done. I'm not going to sit here and defend myself against lies. When you're ready to actually listen to me, you know where to find me. Mark, wait, my mom started, but I was already walking out the door. As I drove home, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had Emily managed to turn everyone against me? And why did no one care enough to even hear my side of the story? I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep going to those dinners, couldn't keep subjecting myself to Emily's manipulations. If my family wanted to believe her lies, fine, but I wasn't going to stick around and let her ruin me. That night, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't go back until anyone, decided to believe me. After that disastrous Sunday dinner, I stopped going to family gatherings altogether. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed some time to cool off and let things settle. But as the days turned into weeks, the idea of sitting at that table again, with everyone looking at me like I was guilty, felt unbearable. My parents called a few times in the beginning, leaving voicemails that sounded concerned but cautious. Mark, we just want to talk, my mom said in one of them. Maybe we can work through this together. But I couldn't bring myself to call them back. Every time I picked up the phone, I thought about how they'd sided with Emily, how they'd told me to prove I was innocent without even questioning her lies. It hurt too much to hear their voices. Jake, of course, was his usual laid-back self. He texted me here and there, mostly to check in. You good, man? Or let me know if you need anything. But he wasn't exactly taking a stand. One day, after ignoring his text for too long, I finally picked up when he called. Mark, he said, sounding relieved. Finally. I was starting to think you blocked me or something. Sorry, I muttered. Just been busy. He sighed. Look, I don't want to take sides or anything, but this whole thing with Emily is getting out of hand. Oh, now it's out of hand? I snapped. Where were you when she was throwing me under the bus in front of everyone? Dude, you know I hate drama, he said. I didn't want to get involved. Well, congratulations, Jake, I said bitterly. You didn't get involved. Meanwhile, Emily's been spreading lies about me to the entire family, and everyone believes her. There was a pause, and I could tell he was trying to choose his words carefully. For what it's worth, he finally said, I don't think she's telling the whole truth. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? I don't know, he said hesitantly. It just doesn't add up. But Emily's really good at convincing people, you know? Mom and Dad, they always take her side. So you think she's lying? I pressed. I didn't say that, he said quickly. I'm just saying something feels off. But I don't want to get dragged into this. You know how it is. I felt a wave of frustration. Even though Jake admitted he didn't fully believe Emily, his refusal to stand up for me only made me feel more alone. It was like he was sitting on the sidelines, watching me drown, and all he could say was, that sucks. After we hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about why Emily would do this. She'd always been competitive, sure, and she had a habit of putting me down in subtle ways. But this was something else entirely. I started going over everything in my head, trying to figure out where this could have come from. That's when I remembered a few moments that didn't seem important at the time, but now stood out. There was the time I got a big promotion at work last year. It was a huge deal for me, and my parents had actually seemed really proud. Around the same time, Emily had lost a major client at her job. I remember her making some snide comment during dinner, like, well, at least one of us is having a good year. At the time, I thought she was just venting, but maybe it had cut deeper than I realized. Then there was the family barbecue a few months ago. One of my uncles had been asking me about my job, and when I told him about a project I was working on, he said something like, wow, Mark, I had no idea you were doing so well. Emily had been sitting nearby, and I remembered the look on her face, tight-lipped, almost annoyed. Could it be that simple? Was this all because she felt overshadowed? The idea seemed ridiculous, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Emily had always been the golden child, the one who got all the attention and praise. Maybe she couldn't handle the idea of me stepping into the spotlight, even if it was just for a moment. But even if that was true, it didn't explain why she'd go so far as to lie about me to our parents. This wasn't just petty jealousy, this was malicious. She'd made me out to be a thief, a liar, someone I wasn't. And now, because of her, my family saw me as the bad guy. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call my parents, to beg them to listen to me and believe me. But another part of me felt like it was pointless. If they hadn't trusted me enough to ask for my side of the story in the first place, what was the point in trying now? I started wondering if maybe it was time to walk away, not just from Emily, but from all of them. Maybe I needed to stop trying to fix things and focus on myself. The thought of cutting ties with my family was painful, but so was the idea of staying in a dynamic where I was constantly being doubted and belittled. For now, I decided to stay distant. I stopped answering calls, stopped checking the family group chat. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind off everything. But no matter how busy I stayed, the weight of it all lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stuck in a fight I didn't even know how to win. And as much as I wanted to move on, a part of me couldn't let it go. I needed to find a way to clear my name, to show everyone the truth. I just didn't know where to start. After weeks of silence, isolation, and frustration, something happened that completely turned the situation on its head. And the craziest part? It was pure luck. It started with a phone call from Jake. I hadn't heard from him since our last conversation, so I wasn't sure what to expect. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hey Jake, I said, my tone cautious. Mark, he said, sounding uneasy. Listen, I think you need to see something. What is it? I asked, my stomach twisting. It's a text, he said. From Emily. What does it say? I demanded. Jake hesitated. She accidentally sent it to me instead of someone else, I guess. I don't know who she meant to text, but it's about you. Send it to me, I said quickly, my heart pounding. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a notification. I opened the message, and there it was, a screenshot of a text from Emily. It read, Mom and Dad will finally take me seriously after this. They always act like Mark's perfect, but not anymore. This will show them who he really is. I stared at the text, my mind racing. There it was. Proof. Proof that Emily had been lying, that she'd made everything up to turn my parents against me. She'd done it on purpose, all to make herself look better. I felt a mix of anger, relief, and determination. For weeks, I'd been drowning in her lies, but now I had something concrete, something she couldn't deny or twist. Jake, I said, my voice steady. Thank you for sending me this. No problem, he said. What are you going to do? I'm going to end this, I said. The next Sunday, I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. I didn't text or call ahead. I wanted to catch everyone off guard. When I walked in, my parents looked surprised to see me, and Emily, sitting smugly at the dining table, raised an eyebrow. Mark, my mom said cautiously. We weren't expecting you. I know, I said, but I need to talk to all of you, right now. What's this about? Emily asked, her tone dripping with fake concern. You'll see, I said, pulling out my phone. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I've spent the last few weeks trying to figure out why Emily would lie about me. I began looking directly at her. And now I finally know. What are you talking about? She said, feigning innocence. I held up my phone. Jake sent me a text you accidentally sent him. Would you like me to read it out loud, or should I just show it to Mom and Dad? Emily's face went pale. What text? She stammered. I didn't answer. Instead, I handed my phone to my dad, who read the message silently. His face hardened as he passed the phone to my mom. She read it, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Emily, my mom said, her voice trembling. What is this? It's not what it looks like, Emily said quickly, her voice shaking. I was just venting. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Venting? I said, my voice calm but firm. You spread a lie about me, about your own brother, to turn our parents against me. And you think you can just brush it off as venting? Emily stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. You've always been the favorite, she yelled, her composure cracking. Mom and Dad always act like you're so perfect, like you can do no wrong. I just wanted them to see that you're not as great as they think you are. Favorite? I repeated, stunned. Emily, they've been on your side this entire time. They believed you without question. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to you, and you're standing here acting like I've had it easy? My parents were silent, their expressions a mix of guilt and disbelief. Emily, my dad finally said, his voice stern. Is it true? Did you make up the story about Mark? Emily's lower lip trembled, and for a moment I thought she might try to deny it again. But then she broke down, covering her face with her hands. Yes, she said through sobs. I made it up. I wanted you to stop comparing me to him all the time. I wanted you to see me for once. My mom sank into a chair, looking like the wind had been knocked out of her. Emily, she whispered, how could you do this? To your own brother. I didn't think it would go this far. Emily cried. I didn't think he'd fight back. I stood there, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. I'd wanted the truth to come out, but seeing Emily break down like that didn't feel like a victory. After a long, uncomfortable silence, my dad spoke again. Mark, he said, turning to me, I'm so sorry, we should have trusted you. We should have listened. I nodded, too exhausted to say much. I just wanted you to believe me, I said quietly. My mom reached out to touch my arm, tears streaming down her face. We were wrong, Mark. I don't know how we'll make it up to you, but we'll try. Emily, still crying, mumbled an apology, but I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. I need some time, I said. I don't know if I can just go back to how things were. My parents nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like they were finally seeing me for who I was, not through Emily's twisted lens, but as their son. As I left the house that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The damage Emily had done would take time to heal, but at least the truth was out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The days following the confrontation felt surreal. For weeks, I'd been carrying this weight, suffocated by lies and doubt. Now, with the truth finally out, I felt lighter, but not entirely free. The damage Emily had done wasn't something that could be undone overnight. My parents called me the morning after the confrontation. I almost didn't answer, but part of me wanted to hear what they had to say. Mark, my mom said, her voice heavy with emotion. I can't stop thinking about everything that happened yesterday. I need you to know how sorry I am for everything. My dad chimed in, his voice unusually soft. We let you down, son. We should have trusted you. We were so blinded by what Emily said that we didn't even stop to think about how unfair we were being to you. Hearing their apologies was bittersweet. On one hand, I'd waited weeks for them to acknowledge what they'd done. On the other, it didn't erase the pain of knowing how quickly they'd turned against me. I appreciate you saying that, I said after a long pause, but it's going to take time for me to move past this. I can't just pretend like everything's fine. My mom started crying, and my dad reassured me that they understood. We want to make things right, he said. Whatever it takes, we'll do it. Their sincerity helped, but I knew I needed more than just words. I needed boundaries. In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance. I didn't attend Sunday dinners, and I didn't reply to every text or call. It wasn't out of anger, I just needed space to focus on myself. For too long, I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to keep everyone happy even at my own expense. I wasn't willing to do that anymore. Emily called me a few days after the confrontation. I let it go to voicemail at first, unsure if I was ready to hear from her. When I finally called her back, she sounded different. Mark, she began, her voice shaky. I owe you an apology. A real one. I know what I did was wrong, she said. I was jealous, okay? I've always felt like you were the favorite, even if you don't see it that way. Mom and Dad would talk about how reliable you were, how proud they were of your job, and it felt like I was being pushed aside. I thought if I made you look bad, they'd finally see me. Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I'd spent so much of my life feeling overshadowed by Emily, and here she was, telling me she'd felt the same way about me. I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, Mark. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that. I took a deep breath. Emily, I appreciate your apology, but you hurt me. You didn't just lie, you tried to destroy my reputation, my relationships. It's going to take time for me to trust you again. She said she understood, but her voice carried a note of sadness. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same page, not as siblings competing for attention, but as people who had hurt and been hurt. Surprisingly, Jake was the first person I started reconnecting with. He texted me one afternoon saying he wanted to grab coffee and talk. When we met, he looked uncomfortable, fiddling with his drink before finally speaking. I owe you an apology, he said, not meeting my eyes. I should have stood up for you earlier. I knew something didn't feel right, but I didn't want to deal with it. Why, Jake? I asked, genuinely curious. Why didn't you say anything? He sighed. I hate conflict, man. I always have. But that's not an excuse. I should have had your back. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. You messed up, I said bluntly, but I get it. It's not easy standing up to family. We talked for hours that day, reminiscing about growing up together and acknowledging how the family dynamic had affected both of us in different ways. For the first time in years, I felt like Jake and I were really connecting. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my footing again. My relationship with my parents was still fragile, but they were making an effort. They invited me over for dinner, not a big family gathering, just the three of us, and apologized again for doubting me. "We've been thinking about how we raised you kids," my dad said during one of those dinners. "We didn't mean to play favorites, but looking back, we can see how it might have felt that way. We're sorry for putting you in this position." Their acknowledgement meant a lot. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a step in the right direction. As for Emily, I kept my distance. She texted me occasionally, but I wasn't ready to fully let her back into my life. I wasn't angry anymore, but I was cautious. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. One thing this whole experience taught me was the importance of standing up for myself. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the person who avoided conflict at all costs. But staying silent hadn't helped me. It had only made it easier for others to take advantage of me. I realized that setting boundaries didn't make me selfish or ungrateful. It made me stronger. For the first time in my life, I was prioritizing my own well-being over trying to keep everyone else happy. Life isn't perfect now, but it's better. I've learned to value the relationships that matter and let go of the ones that don't serve me. I've started to rebuild my bond with Jake and my parents, and while things with Emily are still complicated, I'm hopeful that one day we can truly move past this. Most importantly, I've learned that I don't need anyone's approval to know my own worth. I'm not the same Mark who used to sit quietly at the dinner table, letting others overshadow me. I'm stronger now, and I'm not afraid to stand up for myself, even when it's uncomfortable. And honestly, that feels pretty good. Hi, my name's Ryan. I'm 33 years old, and I've got a story that honestly still feels unreal to me. To really explain what's going on now, though, I need to take you back a little. I guess you could say I've always been the odd one out in my family, the black sheep, if you will. It's not like I'm a troublemaker or anything. I have a stable job, a great group of friends, and most importantly, an amazing wife named Sophia. But in my family, none of that seems to matter. Sophia and I have been married for 5 years now, and our relationship is solid. She's my best friend, my partner in everything, and the person who keeps me grounded. I can't imagine my life without her. But if you asked my family about her, you'd think I'd married a villain. From the very beginning, they've treated her like an outsider, like she didn't belong. Now, let me give you a quick rundown of my family dynamics. My mom is, well, let's call her hands-on. She has an opinion about everything, and she doesn't hold back from sharing it. My dad, on the other hand, avoids conflict the plague. He just nods along to whatever my mom says to keep the peace. And then there's Megan, my younger sister. Megan is the golden child, the one who can do no wrong. She's the one who gets praised for every little thing, while I've always been the one expected to step back and let her shine. Growing up, I learned pretty quickly that Megan would always come first. She was the straightest student, the star athlete, the one my parents doted on. Meanwhile, my achievements always seemed to come with a but. If I got a promotion at work, it was, that's great, but are you sure you're ready for the responsibility? If Megan so much as posted a picture of a mediocre dinner she cooked, my mom would rave about her culinary talent like she was on a cooking show. It didn't really bother me much when I was younger. I figured that's just how families work sometimes. But when Sophia entered the picture, things started to sting a little more. My family didn't just ignore her, they went out of their way to make her feel unwelcome. My mom would give her these backhanded compliments like, "That dress is nice, but it's not really your color, is it?" My dad, as usual, stayed quiet. And Megan? Oh, Megan loved to stir the pot. She'd say things like, "Wow, Sophia, you're so different from the kind of people Ryan used to date," with this fake innocent smile. You know the type. What's worse is that Sophia started to notice. She's not the type to complain or make a fuss, but I could tell it hurt her. There were family events where she'd try to join in on conversations, only to be met with polite smiles and quickly change subjects. There were times when we wouldn't even get invited to things, only to find out later that Megan had planned some big get-together and conveniently forgot to include us. I tried to stand up for her when I could, but it always felt like a losing battle. If I called my mom out, she'd turn on the waterworks and say I was being disrespectful. If I confronted Megan, she'd laugh it off and act like I was overreacting. And my dad? He'd just shrug and say, "You know how they are, Ryan. It's best not to make waves." Through all of this, Sophia has been a rock. She's always told me she married me, not my family, and that she could handle their cold shoulders if it meant being with me. But I hate that she even has to deal with it in the first place. She doesn't deserve that, not from them, not from anyone. For a while, I thought things might get better. My family isn't exactly warm, but they're not outright cruel. Or at least I thought they weren't. Then, Megan decided to drop a bombshell that turned everything upside down. And let me tell you, the lengths some people will go to for attention are absolutely wild. But I'll get to that. For now, all you need to know is this. I've spent years trying to balance my love for Sophia with my complicated, messy family dynamics. And as much as I've tried to keep the peace, I'm starting to realize that some things just can't be fixed. So buckle up, because this story is about to take a turn I never saw coming. And trust me, it's one you won't want to miss. A couple of weeks ago, Sophia and I decided to host a casual dinner at our house. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering with my parents, Megan, and a few close family members. Sophia had just gotten a promotion at work, and while she didn't want to make it a big deal, I thought it'd be nice to celebrate with family. Plus, I figured it was a good opportunity for everyone to spend time together in a relaxed setting. The evening started off well enough. My parents showed up on time, and Sophia had gone all out preparing a delicious spread. She'd even baked a cake for dessert, which, trust me, is no small feat considering how busy her schedule is. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Megan walked in. She arrived almost an hour late, not even bothering to apologize. Instead, she strolled in with this smug smile on her face, acting like the star of the show. She barely acknowledged Sophia, offering a quick, "Oh hey," before plopping down on the couch. From the get-go, her energy was off, aloof, distracted, like she had better places to be. As the night went on, Megan started asking these weird, pointed questions. At one point, while everyone was seated around the table, she looked at Sophia and me and said, "So, you two still happy? Really?" She laughed as if it was a joke, but there was something in her tone that made my stomach turn. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it, but then she doubled down. "Marriage is hard, isn't it? I mean, it's not like anyone can really stay happy forever." She said it with this casual, almost amused tone, like she was fishing for something. Sophia just smiled politely and changed the subject, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to ruin the evening by making a scene. That wasn't the end of it, though. Throughout the dinner, Megan kept leaning over to whisper with my parents. She'd glance at Sophia and me, then quickly look away, smirking like she was in on some secret. My mom, of course, joined in, nodding and whispering back. My dad didn't say much, he never does, but even he seemed to be in on whatever was going on. By the time everyone left, I was frustrated but didn't want to dwell on it. I figured Megan was just being her usual dramatic self, and maybe I was overthinking things. But the next day, things took a turn I never expected. I got a call from my cousin Lisa out of the blue. Lisa and I aren't super close, so I was surprised to hear from her. After a few minutes of small talk, she dropped the bombshell. "Hey Ryan, I just wanted to check in. I heard from Megan that you and Sophia might be splitting up. Is everything okay?" I was stunned. "What? No, that's not true at all. Where did you hear that?" She hesitated. "Megan mentioned it at a family dinner. She said she thought you guys were having issues and that Sophia might be planning to leave." I didn't want to believe it, but you know how rumors spread. I was speechless. Megan had been sitting in my house the night before, eating food Sophia had prepared, and now she was spreading lies about us? I assured Lisa that our marriage was fine and asked her not to believe anything Megan said, but the damage was already done. Over the next week, it felt like the entire extended family was suddenly interested in my marriage. I started getting calls and texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were genuinely concerned, asking if Sophia and I were okay. Others, though, well, let's just say they weren't as kind. One aunt actually said to me, "I always knew she wasn't a good fit for you." Can you believe that? Sophia has been nothing but kind and respectful to my family, and here they were, jumping at the chance to tear her down. It wasn't just the calls and texts, either. I noticed the way some family members started acting towards Sophia at gatherings. Side eyes, whispered conversations, and even a few unsubtle comments like, "Sometimes it's better to move on while you're still young." It was humiliating for both of us. Sophia tried to brush it off, but I could tell it was getting to her. She even asked me if I thought my family hated her, and it broke my heart. I didn't have a good answer because, honestly, I was starting to think they might. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. I couldn't let Megan's lies continue to spread. But confronting her, or my parents for that matter, wasn't going to be easy. They'd always been a tight-knit trio, and I knew they'd back each other up, no matter what. Still, I couldn't just sit back and let them ruin my marriage. Little did I know, though, that this was only the beginning. The rumors were just the tip of the iceberg, and the more I dug into what was going on, the uglier things were going to get. I couldn't let the rumors go unchecked any longer. It felt like they were growing by the day, spreading through my family like wildfire. What started as a few concerned calls from cousins had turned into a full-blown narrative that Sophia and I were headed for divorce. It wasn't just annoying, it was deeply hurtful. Sophia and I had built a strong, happy marriage, and the fact that my own family was tearing it down felt like a betrayal. I decided to confront my parents first. They were supposed to be the stable ones in all this, the ones who could help me get to the truth. But when I showed up at their house and brought it up, things didn't go the way I'd hoped. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" I asked as we sat down in their living room. "Why is half the family suddenly convinced that Sophia and I are splitting up? What did Megan say to you?" My mom immediately looked uncomfortable, glancing at my dad as if to say, "You handle this." My dad, true to form, gave a long sigh and tried to brush it off. "Well, you know Megan," he said, fiddling with the remote control. "She likes to talk. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm." "Didn't mean any harm," I repeated, my voice rising. "She's telling people that my marriage is falling apart. How is that harmless?" My mom finally spoke up, but instead of addressing the issue, she turned it around on me. "Ryan, we're just worried about you," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "Megan mentioned that she's noticed some signs, tension between you and Sophia." "What signs?" I demanded. What could she possibly have noticed? "Sophia and I are fine." My mom hesitated, then said, "Megan thought Sophia seemed distant at dinner the other night. She said it looked like the two of you weren't as close as you used to be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're basing this on a look? On something Megan thought she saw? Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds?" My dad chimed in, clearly trying to de-escalate. "Son, maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Megan probably misinterpreted something, but I wasn't buying it. I knew my sister, and I knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Megan had always loved drama, and this was just her latest way of stirring the pot. Still, I needed to hear it from her directly. I called Megan later that day, and when she answered, her tone was as smug as ever. "Oh, hey Ryan," she said, as if she hadn't just turned my life upside down. What's up? What's up? I repeated, barely able to contain my frustration. Why are you telling people that Sophia and I are splitting up? There was a pause, and then she let out a small laugh. Oh, come on, Ryan. I didn't tell anyone that. I just said I heard it from someone else. Who? I demanded. Who told you that? She hesitated for a fraction of a second before saying, a reliable source. A reliable source. I repeated, incredulous. You're lying. No one told you that because it's not true. You made it up. Instead of denying it, Megan leaned into her usual defense mechanism, deflection. Look, I was just trying to help, she said, sounding offended. If Sophia's unhappy, don't you think you should know? Maybe she's not telling you how she really feels. I was furious. Megan, stop pretending you're doing me a favor. You're spreading lies, and it's hurting not just me but Sophia too. You need to stop. But Megan wasn't about to back down. Whatever, Ryan, she said dismissively. If it's not true, then you've got nothing to worry about, right? Her casual attitude made my blood boil, but I realized I wasn't going to get through to her. Megan didn't care about the truth. She cared about attention, and she was clearly enjoying the chaos she'd created. The fallout from her lies was worse than I expected. At the next family event, Sophia and I walked in, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on us. People whispered behind their hands, and a few didn't even bother to hide it. One uncle gave me a sympathetic pat on the back and said, "Hang in there, buddy," as if I was some tragic figure. The worst moment came when one of my cousins, clearly emboldened by the rumors, made a not-so-subtle joke. "So when's the big split?" he said with a grin. "You guys setting a date yet?" Sophia froze, her face turning red with embarrassment. I pulled her aside and tried to reassure her, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Why aren't you doing more, Ryan?" she asked quietly. "Why are you letting them treat me like this?" I didn't have a good answer. Part of me wanted to stand on a table and shout at everyone to stop, to defend Sophia with every ounce of energy I had. But another part of me, the part that had been conditioned by years of dealing with my family, felt paralyzed. I'd spent so long trying to keep the peace that I didn't know how to fight back. The tension between Sophia and me started to grow. She felt humiliated, and I felt stuck. Every time I tried to talk to my parents or Megan, it felt like hitting a brick wall. They either deflected or dismissed me, acting like I was overreacting. Meanwhile, the rumors kept spreading, and the damage was already being done. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. Megan's lies were about to unravel in a way that none of us could have predicted, and when they did, it would change everything. I had reached my breaking point. The rumors about my marriage weren't just whispers anymore. They had become the main topic of conversation at every family gathering, and Sophia and I were at the center of the storm. The worst part, it was all a lie, and I knew exactly who was responsible. Megan. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her actions than just casual drama. She wasn't just stirring the pot for fun, this was calculated. I decided to dig deeper, and what I discovered left me both furious and heartbroken. One day, while venting to my cousin Lisa, the same one who had first called about the rumors, she let something slip. Honestly, Ryan, I think Megan was just jealous. Everyone was talking about Sophia's promotion at dinner, and, well, you know how Megan is when she's not the center of attention. It clicked. That night at the dinner party, when Megan was whispering with my parents and throwing glances at Sophia, wasn't just her being her usual self. She'd started the rumors out of pure jealousy. Sophia's promotion had been the highlight of the evening, and Megan couldn't stand it. Instead of being happy for her, Megan had decided to tear her down in the most underhanded way possible. I was livid. This wasn't just petty, it was cruel. Sophia had worked so hard for that promotion, and instead of celebrating, she'd spent weeks feeling humiliated because of Megan's lies. I couldn't let it go any longer. The next family gathering was coming up, and I knew it was time to confront Megan face to face. When the day arrived, I walked into my parents' house with a mix of anger and determination. Megan was already there, lounging on the couch like she didn't have a care in the world. She glanced up at me with her usual smug smile, completely unfazed. I didn't waste any time. "Megan," I said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "we need to talk. Right now." She raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "What's this about, Ryan?" "You know exactly what this is about," I snapped. "The rumors you've been spreading about Sophia and me, the ones you completely made up." Her smirk didn't falter. "Oh, come on, Ryan. Don't be so dramatic. It was just a joke." "A joke?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've humiliated Sophia. You've made our lives miserable for weeks. And for what? Because you couldn't handle her getting a little praise at dinner?" Megan rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. Nobody even cares about that stupid promotion. I was just having some fun." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Having fun? Do you even understand the damage you've caused? People think my marriage is falling apart because of you." At this point, the room had gone silent. My parents were sitting on the other side of the room, watching the confrontation unfold. I turned to them, desperate for support. "Mom, Dad, you've seen what's been happening. You know this isn't right." For a moment, I thought they might back me up. But then my mom spoke, and her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Well," she said, hesitating for a moment, "to be honest, Ryan, we weren't exactly upset when we heard the rumors. We've always thought you could do better than Sophia." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "What?" I said, barely able to process what I was hearing. My dad, as usual, stayed quiet, but my mom pressed on. "She's nice, sure, but she's not the kind of person we envisioned for you. When Megan mentioned there might be trouble, we just thought maybe it was for the best." I was stunned. My own parents, people who were supposed to support me in my happiness, had been secretly rooting for my marriage to fail. They didn't just tolerate Megan's behavior, they enabled it. In their eyes, it was easier to believe a lie that fit their narrative than to accept the reality that Sophia and I were happy together. I turned back to Megan, who looked downright pleased with herself. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "All of you. You've made it so clear that you don't care about me or Sophia. You only care about your own twisted version of what my life should look like." With that, I grabbed my coat and turned to leave. "I'm done," I said firmly. "I'm done trying to make this family happy. You've crossed the line, and I'm not going to let you drag me, or Sophia, down with you." As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of relief. For the first time, I was choosing my own happiness over their toxic approval. Sophia and I didn't deserve this, and I was finally ready to stand up for us. Little did I know, though, that this was just the start of a much bigger shift in my life. My relationship with my family would never be the same, and honestly, that was probably for the best. After that explosive confrontation at my parents' house, I knew things couldn't go back to the way they were. It wasn't just about the rumors anymore, it was about everything. Years of passive-aggressive comments, cold shoulders, and outright disrespect had finally come to a head. I was tired of bending over backward to keep the peace, especially when it came at the expense of my wife and our happiness. It was time to make a change. Sophia and I had a long talk that night. She told me how much everything had been weighing on her, the whispers, the judgment, the feeling of never being accepted. "Ryan," she said, her voice trembling, "I love you, but I can't keep doing this. Your family doesn't just dislike me, they hate that I exist in your life." Hearing her say that broke my heart. But the truth was, she wasn't wrong. My family had made their feelings clear, and their actions were making her miserable. I couldn't keep subjecting her to that. So together we made a decision we would go low contact with my family. No more forcing Sophia to attend family gatherings where she'd be ignored or insulted. No more trying to smooth things over when they crossed the line. From now on, we'd prioritize our peace. At first, it felt strange. My family had always been a big part of my life, even if they weren't always supportive. But the relief was almost immediate. For the first time in weeks, Sophia and I felt like we could breathe again. We started focusing on ourselves, on our marriage, our friends, and the people who genuinely cared about us. Of course, Megan wasn't about to let things go that easily. A few days after the fallout, she started posting cryptic updates on social media. Things like, "Some people can't handle the truth, and it's sad when people turn their backs on family." She didn't name names, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She even had the audacity to post an old picture of us as kids with the caption, "Miss when things were simpler," before some people changed. It didn't stop there. Megan decided to take things a step further by messaging Sophia directly. At first, it was subtle jabs, comments like, "I hope you're happy now that Ryan's cut off his family for you." But then it escalated. One night, Sophia showed me a message Megan had sent that left me fuming. It read, "You've always been good at manipulating Ryan. I guess it's no surprise you finally succeeded in stealing him away from his own family." Sophia didn't respond, but I could see how much it upset her. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I didn't steal you from anyone. They pushed you away. Why can't she see that?" I didn't have an answer for her. Megan's behavior wasn't logical, it was vindictive. She wasn't lashing out because she cared about me, she was angry that she'd lost control. For years, she'd thrived on being the center of attention, the golden child who could do no wrong. My decision to step away from the family dynamic challenged that, and she couldn't handle it. The hardest part of all this was realizing how much I had enabled it over the years. I had let my mom's criticism slide, brushed off my dad's passivity, and laughed along with Megan's so-called jokes, all because it was easier than standing up to them. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the best thing to do, but in reality, I had just been avoiding the inevitable. I started reflecting on all the times I had let my family's behavior affect Sophia. There were countless moments I could have defended her, but didn't. Like the time my mom criticized her cooking in front of everyone at a family dinner, or when Megan conveniently forgot to invite us to her birthday party. Each time, I had told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But looking back, I realized how much those moments had chipped away at Sophia's confidence and sense of belonging. I made a promise to myself that night. I vowed to break the cycle. I wouldn't let my family's toxicity define my life anymore. And I wouldn't let it hurt Sophia any longer. If that meant estranging myself from them, so be it. My marriage, my happiness, and my peace of mind were worth more than their approval. It wasn't an easy decision. There were moments when I questioned if I was doing the right thing. Cutting ties with your family, even partially, isn't something anyone does lightly. But every time I saw Sophia smile without that shadow of worry hanging over her, I knew we were on the right path. In the weeks that followed, Sophia and I started rebuilding our lives. We spent more time with friends who genuinely cared about us, and we found joy in the little things, quiet dinners at home, weekend trips, and long talks about the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. As for Megan, she continued her antics online, but I stopped paying attention. My mom tried to reach out once, sending me a long text about family loyalty and how I was letting Sophia come between us. I didn't respond. I had already made my choice, and I wasn't going to let guilt pull me back into a situation that was toxic for both me and my wife. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the expectations, the judgment, and the endless cycle of drama. And most importantly, I felt like I was finally standing up for what mattered most, my marriage. Little did I know, the ripple effects of my decision were just beginning to unfold. But at that moment, I was at peace, knowing I had chosen the right path for me and Sophia. A few weeks had passed since Sophia and I decided to go low contact with my family. Things were calmer on our end, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't still hurt. As much as I wanted to move on, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from my dad. It read, "Hey Ryan, can we talk? I want to apologize." I stared at the message for a while, unsure how to feel. My dad wasn't one for direct communication, let alone apologies. He was the keep your head down and let the storm pass type. For him to reach out like this, I knew it had to be serious. When I called him back, his voice sounded hesitant, almost nervous. "Ryan," he began, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I owe you and Sophia an apology." That caught me off guard. "For what?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "For not speaking up," he admitted. "Your mom, Megan, they've been unfair to you both, and I should have said something sooner. I just hate conflict." But that's no excuse. I didn't know what to say. For years, my dad had been a silent observer to all the chaos, and while I resented him for not standing up for me, hearing him admit it felt like a weight lifting off my chest. But what he said next changed everything. "There's something you should know about Megan," he continued. "This isn't the first time she's done something like this." I froze. "What do you mean?" He sighed heavily, like he'd been carrying this secret for a long time. "Years ago, before you and Sophia got married, Megan started a rumor about your cousin Sarah. She told everyone Sarah was cheating on her fiancé. It wasn't true, of course, but it caused a lot of drama in the family. Sarah almost called off the wedding because of it." I was stunned. I'd vaguely remembered some tension around Sarah's wedding, but I never knew Megan was behind it. "Why would she do that?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. "Because Sarah was getting a lot of attention," my dad said simply. "Megan can't stand it when the spotlight isn't on her. She thrives on creating chaos. It's how she stays relevant." Hearing this made everything click. Megan's behavior wasn't just about Sophia or me. It was a pattern, something she'd been doing for years to anyone who threatened her position as the center of the family. And the worst part, my parents had let it slide, time and time again. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," my dad said quietly. "I just thought, maybe if we ignored it, she'd grow out of it. But it's clear now that she hasn't, and it's not fair to you or Sophia." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "Dad, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I see how much this has hurt you," he said, "and I don't want to lose you. You're my son, and I hate what this has done to our family." For the first time in years, I felt like my dad was on my side. It didn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it was a step forward. I thanked him for telling me the truth, and told him I needed some time to think. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, replaying the conversation in my mind. Over the next few days, word about Megan's past behavior started to spread. My dad must have shared what he told me with other family members because I started getting messages from cousins and aunts who hadn't spoken to me in months. One cousin, Jamie, reached out and said, "I had no idea Megan was behind the rumors about Sarah. That explains so much." Another cousin, Emily, told me about a time Megan had spread lies about her failing college classes, which led to her parents unfairly pressuring her to drop out. "She's been doing this to all of us," Emily said. "It's like she gets some sick thrill out of tearing people down." The more stories I heard, the more I realized Megan's web of lies extended far beyond me and Sophia. For years, she had been sowing discord in the family, using gossip and manipulation to keep herself in the spotlight. But now people were starting to see her for who she really was. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Some extended family members like Jamie and Emily made it clear they were on my side. They apologized for believing Megan's lies about Sophia and promised to support us moving forward. Even some of the older relatives who had always seemed firmly in Megan's corner started distancing themselves from her. Megan, of course, didn't take this well. She doubled down on her social media posts, writing things like, "It's funny how people twist the truth when they can't face reality, and family loyalty is a lost art." But her attempts to control the narrative were falling flat. The more people learned about her behavior, the less power she had. As for Sophia and me, we started to feel a sense of vindication. For so long, it felt like we were fighting an uphill battle, but now the truth was finally coming to light. It didn't erase the pain Megan had caused, but it gave us hope that we could rebuild relationships with the people who truly mattered. Looking back, I realized something important. Megan's lies might have shaken us, but they didn't break us. If anything, they made Sophia and me stronger, both as a couple and as individuals. And as for my family, the cracks Megan had created were finally beginning to heal, one conversation at a time. A few months after everything came to light, Sophia and I finally felt like we were starting to heal. The decision to go low contact with my family had been tough, but it was also the best thing we could have done for ourselves. Without the constant drama and negativity, it was like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. For the first time in years, we could focus on the people and things that truly mattered. One evening, Sophia suggested we host a small dinner at our house, not for my family, but for the friends and relatives who had supported us through all of this. It was her way of turning the page, of creating new, positive memories in a space that had once been overshadowed by Megan's toxicity. I loved the idea. We invited a mix of close friends, my cousin Jamie, and a few other family members who had distanced themselves from Megan after learning the truth. The atmosphere was warm and relaxed, filled with laughter and genuine connection. Sophia had prepared one of her signature dishes, and everyone couldn't stop raving about it. For the first time in a long time, I looked around the room and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. These were the people who cared about us, not because of appearances or some twisted sense of loyalty, but because they genuinely valued our happiness. As the evening wound down, Jamie pulled me aside. "Ryan," she said, "I'm so glad you and Sophia are doing this. You deserve to be surrounded by people who lift you up, not drag you down." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I had been trapped in the mindset that family was everything, even if they treated you poorly. But now, I was learning that family wasn't just about blood, it was about the people who showed up, who supported you, and who celebrated your successes without jealousy or resentment. The next day, I sat down to write a message to my parents. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but I knew it was necessary. For too long, I had let things slide, avoiding confrontation in the hopes that things would somehow get better on their own. But now, I understood that change only happens when you set boundaries and stand up for yourself. In the message, I was firm but civil. I explained how their behavior, and their tolerance of Megan's lies, had hurt me and Sophia deeply. I told them that while I loved them, I couldn't continue to be part of a dynamic that was toxic and damaging. Until there's real change, I wrote, Sophia and I will be keeping our distance. We need to prioritize our peace and well-being. When I hit send, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I didn't know how they would react, but I knew I had done the right thing. It didn't take long for Megan to catch wind of my message. Within hours, she was flooding my phone with texts, trying every tactic she could think of to pull me back in. At first, it was guilt. How can you turn your back on your own family? Mom and dad are heartbroken. Then came the manipulation. Sophia's brainwashed you. You're not the same person you used to be. Finally, when none of that worked, she resorted to anger, accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish. I ignored her. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe her, or anyone else in my family, an explanation. I had spent years trying to please them, bending over backward to earn their approval, only to have it thrown back in my face. Enough was enough. Sophia noticed the change in me, too. You seem lighter, she said one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. Like you're finally letting go of all the weight you've been carrying. She was right. By setting boundaries and cutting ties with the toxicity, I was finally able to focus on what truly mattered, my marriage, my happiness, and the life we were building together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I missed the idea of having a close, supportive family, but I knew the reality of my family didn't match that ideal. And that was okay. Looking back, I realized how much I had grown through this experience. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started. I had learned to stand up for myself, to prioritize my well-being, and to value the people who genuinely cared about me. Cutting ties with my family's toxicity wasn't just about protecting Sophia, it was about becoming the person I needed to be for myself. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I feel a sense of peace I never thought I'd find. Megan's attempts to regain control have faded into the background, little more than noise I can easily tune out. My parents haven't responded to my message, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I've done my part, and the rest is up to them. In the end, I've come to understand that life is too short to waste on people who don't value you. Family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about love, respect, and mutual support. And while my family may never change, I've found a new kind of family in the friends and loved ones who stand by me and Sophia without judgment or drama. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally living the life I was meant to live. And that, more than anything, makes all the struggle worth it.